occasion I had it to see you through virtually. Thank you very much for coming and giving the lecture.
Thank you, sir.
This is not my question. I borrowed the question from our respected chairman, Sri Valiyappa. And he has given a question that whether he is available on online, I do not know. He is asking me the question in the morning, but I have given some answers based on my teaching experience. And during the lunchtime also, I reviewed some of the research journals. Anyway, the question I am posing to you also. And the co-education, the students are giving the best performance rather than the single-sex education. Why? What is the reason, any scientific reason behind that? Can you explain me, madam?
I don't think there is any scientific explanation, sir. But I guess, you need to say students who have come from co-education schools, once they get into college, they do better. Is it?
Yeah, yes, madam. In North America, they have norms that they only start co-education, not single gender education also. There is some, the research is going on. Last year, 2019, the India Today has did some research in Delhi and gave some findings also. Anyway, the co-education is better. Today we have a co-education in all our group institutions. Our students are doing very great job and going for high marks. And some of our students from Sona College of Technology turning into UPSC officers also. And thank you very much. Thank you very much for madam for rendering and giving the best time of you for us. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was my honor.
Thank you, Dr. Sasikumar also. Since I had a very great discussion with Dr. Sasi also. And he is also very well associated with the Vice Chairman, Mr. Tyag also. Thank you very much, madam.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I know Dr. Sashi very well, and I thought only Dr. Sashi speaks well, but I think the family itself speaks well, so I'm sure my best wishes to you also, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for inspiring us with your words, ma'am.
Thank you.
We are happy to have Dr. Joanne Cook, Associate Professor, Yale School of Medicine, Department of Psychiatry. Dr. Cook has worked clinically with a range of trauma survivors, including combat veterans and former prisoners of war and survivors of 2001 World Trade Center bombing. She has served as the principal of investigator on 7 federal grants from the National Institute of Mental Health, the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality, and Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. She was a member of the American Psychological Association Guideline Development Panel and the president of APA's Division of Trauma Psychology in 2016. She has over 100 publications in the area of traumatic stress, mental health, and implementation science. She has also published over 100 OPEDs in the places like CNN, Time Ideas, Newsweeks, and The Hill. We are much delighted and honored to have Dr. Joanne Cook to deliver the International Women's Day Address 2021. On behalf of the Sona Group of Institutions, we welcome you to address the gathering.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here. I hope you guys had a wonderful day. I plan on having a wonderful day at 6:30 in the morning here. I hope my voice isn't a little too scratchy. Am I able to pull up my slides? Can I pull up my slides for the group? Okay. Share screen. Magic here. What I'd like to do is take the opportunity to talk today about how women can bounce back or bend without breaking in the experience of stress and trauma and the challenges we face at the work site. I understand that what I'm about to say has a very Western focus, and I apologize. I've been to India. My husband is a #1 fan of India. I am less aware, I'm less of a global citizen than he is, so I apologize for that in advance. So the purpose of my presentation here today is just to briefly review about the stresses and traumas that women experience. Not that men don't, but that women do, and that we experience more of these types of stressors. Some of these are extremely difficult to talk about. I apologize for bringing them up, but if we do not talk about them, it is really hard to move forward. I'm just going to note briefly the physical, emotional, and psychological social consequences of these experiences, describe a bit, as if that wasn't bad enough. I'm going to describe a bit about some of the challenges that women face, unique challenges that we face in the workplace. All of that difficult stuff said, I really want to empower us and talk about how we can heal with the help of others, with the help of spirituality, with the help of ourselves, and not only heal, but bounce back from these experiences, and also how we can tap into our own power and promote resilience. I hope this is inspiring. It's going to be a fast shot. Hopefully someday I can come back and talk to you longer than a half an hour. Okay, so right off the bat, we're going to talk very difficult things. Sadly, these things happen in the US and all over the world. These are called adverse childhood events. We also call them big T traumas. They're things that happen with great prevalence that so many of us don't talk about. They are abuse such as physical, sexual, and verbal abuse. There are neglect, like physical and emotional. Now these things, I think what happens to a lot of trauma survivors is that we internalize them and think that they happen to us because of something about us, which is not true. And sometimes they don't only happen because people intend to cause us harm, but it's because people have a lot of other things happening in their lives. For example, neglect. Sometimes parents are separated. Sometimes parents have extreme financial difficulties and must work multiple jobs and therefore aren't around to protect their children on a regular basis. So these things are very complicated, but they do occur. There's also something called what we call household dysfunction. That's substance abuse in the house, mental illness, depression, anxiety, schizophrenia, other psychotic disorders. There's interpersonal violence where the mother is being harmed. There's someone that could be incarcerated or imprisoned, and there's parental separation or divorce. These things, again, sadly, happen with great frequency, and they have a tremendous impact on people's physical and emotional health. Now, this is data from the US, but the data from worldwide is not much different. I have not seen good epidemiologic data, which is the best kind of data that we have when we're looking at the prevalence of not only traumatic events, but the prevalence of mental health disorders or physical health disorders related. I have not seen that in India. I'm not sure why. We could talk about that. So in general, these big T traumas, at least 61% of men and 50% of women experience them. But we also experience what we think of as small T traumas, everyday chronic sort of stressors. And these include things like poverty, limited access to financial resources, under or unemployment, unstable housing, sexual harassment, and gender discrimination. In addition, they also talk about that traumas can happen to women across the lifespan. So not only do we have adverse childhood experiences, but we can have traumas across our lifespan, and on top of that, we have often these chronic environmental strains. Now, all other things equal, and things aren't always equal, the greater number of these experiences that we have, the greater impact of them on our physical and our emotional health. So, in general, all other things equal, if someone experiences at least 2 or more of these adverse childhood experiences, they have a greater likelihood or probability of experiencing mood disorders like depression, anxiety disorders like generalized anxiety or a phobia, They also experience trauma-related disorders, which is my specialty, which is post-traumatic stress disorder. In this country, women who have those experiences, tend to also abuse substances, both alcohol and drugs. I believe that's different in your country, and that's something we can talk about it. And then impulse control disorders, such as excessive risk-taking, gambling, sexual compulsivity. So trauma can do a number on people's psyches. It can also do a number on people's physical health. So adverse childhood experiences can impact the probability of you having heart disease, having cancer. And sometimes with the people that I've worked clinically, they'll say, you know, people think it's just all in my head, that I think I'm sick, but I'm not really sick. And I have to tell you that there's so much research, even a whole book dedicated to quantitative studies showing the impact of trauma on physical health. So it's not just that it's in people's head, but if you go to people's medical charts and you look at their medical charts and you're blinded to who has trauma and who doesn't. The people who have trauma have greater heart disease, cardiovascular problems, chronic pain, irritable bowel. Trauma is bad for our physical health. Now, there are gender differences in who gets subsequent PTSD, my specialty. And the truth is that even though men experience trauma, and they do, the impact of it is less, particularly on the PTSD symptoms. We see to have much higher rates of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, in women populations, so 2 to 3 more times. Now that said, you're gonna say, wow, only 11% with these big T traumas and all these environmental stressors, how come more women don't have it? And the truth is, for whatever reason, some of us don't wind up getting mental health disorders, and that's a beautiful thing, and we can learn from that and train ourselves. So I'm going to try to explain this graph. Most people, after they experience a traumatic event, will have some symptoms. Some people will have a relatively few symptoms and then continue to have few symptoms or no symptoms. We call those people resilient. And if you're not in that category, we can help you get there. And you can help yourself get there. Some people experience a lot of symptoms, but then they recover over the course of time, whether it's from social support, whether it's because of something they said or did, or good family support, they recover. Other people have some experiences of symptoms, and then they seem to be fine, and over time they have what we call a delayed reaction. So maybe there's a trigger in the environment or an anniversary date, a reminder of the trauma happens, and then they have a flood of nightmares and feelings of sadness and hyperarousal and irritability. And other people, unfortunately, and this has nothing to do with you as a person, okay? And I think that's what so many people sadly believe, that they bring these symptoms on themselves, or that there's something wrong with them that they have these symptoms. And we must get rid of that thinking. That is a myth in the field, and a myth in our society. Some people experience a traumatic event, and then they have a lot of symptoms, and those symptoms follow them. They sometimes don't even follow them for months, they follow them for years. And I've worked with people who follow them all the way into older adulthood. Now here I've explained those 4 trajectories for you, just so you have them, because hopefully I'm going to give you my slides and you're going to be able to remember those. Now, put all of that trauma and stress aside, and let's talk about challenges for women in the workplace. In general, there's a lot of challenges for women. Now, I'm not saying that there's not challenges for men. I think sometimes when women in particular talk about these issues, people think we're being anti-male. And I have to say, that couldn't be further from the truth. I'm married to a man, I gave birth to 2 sons, I am pro-men and I am pro-women. The truth is, we experience unique challenges and we need to be able to face them and address them. We typically, when we're offered a job, even when we're on the job, we don't ask for more money typically, or more space, or more goodies in the world. We typically have our goals set lower by the institution and we tend to set lower goals for ourselves, sadly. And this is on average. So you may not fit into this category, this is on average. We tend to not self-promote. That's not how we're socialized as women, to be communal and to look out for other people. We tend to be satisfied with less, more anxious, and more cooperative. Put on top of that, in addition, we face not only discrimination, but some harassment on the job as well. And that there's been a real movement across the US and the world about saying, it's me too, I've experienced those too, you're not alone. I think there's a number of reasons, and this might be different in India than it is in the US, because I believe that you have more female leaders than we do, but there's a pronounced lack of women leaders. And I think there's some reasons why, and there's some good data to suggest why. I think there are vestiges of prejudice against women. I think there's resistance to our leadership. I think it's an issue of leadership style that happens, a dynamic of attribution. I'm going to explain all of these things. There's demands of our social life and our family life. And there tends to be an underinvestment in social capital. I'll tell you something funny about some advice that a senior woman gave me a number of years ago. So I think the vestiges of prejudice are men as a group make more than women. In the US in 2020, women who were employed full-time made 81 cents for every dollar that a man made, okay? So we could be equivalently ready for the job, and we make less. It's just a fact. And men tend to ascend to supervisory or administrative positions quicker than we do. In general, male leaders receive more favorable evaluations for the equivalent females. I have to tell you, ladies, that teaching at a place like Yale, which is a wonderful institution, but has its own levels of these things happening, I will tend to get students who don't talk about my style as much, but who talk about what I'm wearing. I kid you not. I think there's also a resistance to our leadership. When you think about, when people talk about leaders, they talk about men as leaders, but they talk about us as female leaders. They don't often just say, oh, that's a leader. They say, that's a female leader. I think people tend to associate men and women with different traits, and they link men with more traits that connote leadership. I think they also tend to, we have a smaller window of acceptable behavior, or a smaller band of acceptable behavior, and we tend to be viewed more harshly. And actually, it's not just the men who are viewing us harshly, it's the women as well. Women are hard on other women, and that in my opinion, really needs to stop. So I think it's very hard for us to develop a style that works. In this country, in my country, when we engage in what we think of as agency and things that are sort of assertive, and when we're self-reliant and ambitious, when we look too strong in this country, forgive me, we're labeled a bitch. And so then people don't like us when we tap into our power. And many women are socialized to be mainly communal, where we care for other people. And I think we have to find the right way to sort of balance both of those things to be most effective. In addition, over time, we all need to work to change the culture so that it is more accepting when we tap into that power and that self-reliance and the ambition. No matter what presentation style we have to juggle multiple things, more so than men, on average and typically. Home life, work life, no matter what style we choose, it's very hard for us to be both respected and liked by men and women. So I am telling you in some ways, at least in the US, that the deck is stacked against us in some ways, but that does not mean that we shouldn't be hopeful and find ways around that. As I tell myself, and as I tell my children, and as I tell my patients, fall down 7 times, get up 8. That's a wonderful Chinese proverb that I live by. I think there's also dynamics of attribution, and when things go well, men tend to take credit, whereas women tend to see themselves as lucky. And when something goes wrong, men tend to say it in terms of external factors. Oh, it was, that test was terrible. It wasn't anything about their ability, it was the test or the teacher. Whereas women, we tend to internalize it. and tend to take it more personally, which is why we are more susceptible to things like depression and PTSD, which are internalization of disorders. And then I think there are some ways that women get in their own way, and that we really need to find our way around. I think we don't recognize, we're not taught, we're not socialized to recognize negotiation opportunities. I think we don't want to be seen as confrontational, so even asserting ourselves a little bit, we are fearful of that, some of us. I certainly am when I talk to my chairman. I think we tend to only recognize or see or focus on our weaknesses, and we bargain ourselves down. And I think we also, and not saying that these are all bad things, they're things for us to be aware of, we tend to take responsibility for ensuring everybody's satisfaction, not only our own. So when Hillary Clinton ran for president of the US in 2016, many of us were very disappointed, not just because she's a woman, but because we thought she would have made a much better leader. But I remember in her concession speech, she said, you know, we've broken the glass ceiling and there's all these cracks in the glass ceiling. And a lot of times when we think about women moving ahead, we talk about this glass ceiling. Well, I think there's a more apt metaphor that we can use, because the truth is, it's not just a glass ceiling for us, but it's the sum of many obstacles. There are glass ceilings, there are glass walls, and there are glass floors, and we don't even realize that. So I think a more apt metaphor is that it's a labyrinth or a maze that we must negotiate over time and continue to negotiate that with the help of other women and the help of supportive men. It is possible. So I'd like to sort of talk a little bit now about not only healing from stress and trauma, but workplace challenges. And I'd like to do a number of things. You and I could sit and talk about these for days, not simply a half an hour. So I'm going to try to hit these hard in the few minutes that we have left. I think one of the biggest things that I've seen in the past 20 years of doing research on traumatic stress, as well as working with a range of trauma survivors, is that validation, is to have someone believe you and someone to feel your pain, acknowledge what you've been through. That is key. If you do not have someone in your environment, you can do that for yourself. I will show you and tell you how to do that. In addition, one of the biggest predictors of who gets PTSD and depression after a traumatic event is social support and connection, and having someone to show you that care. I think sometimes in an attempt to help ourselves, women and men who've experienced trauma tend to minimize it or deny it or push it down and bury it. What happens is it becomes like a very stinky garbage can whose lid we never want to take off. And we think we're helping ourselves, but it will have a reverberating effect. And what data has shown is that the more you push it down, the more it will come back to you in nightmares, in difficulties relating to other people. So it's about experiencing and sharing those experiences with trusted family members or friends. If you can, participating in self-help or empowerment groups so you know you're not alone, and talking to healthcare providers or using trauma treatment apps, which is something that we're working on actively now. If you do not have anyone in your environment, sadly, to give you that validation, you can give it to yourself. There are ways of using mindfulness to be aware of your thoughts and feelings, acknowledge those emotions, soothe yourself like you would try to soothe other people. Radically accept those thoughts. Again, not sort of pushing those down, but putting your arm around those thoughts when they come and those emotions. Being your own best friend and taking care of yourself. Supporting those, feeling your feelings, allowing yourself to express them internally and not pushing them down. So we have a saying in the US, it's a little crass, I apologize, we're a much more crass society than yours, no shoulds. And that means no shoulding all over yourself, not to say to yourself, I shouldn't feel like this. All feelings are legitimate and real. Now, how do we tap into those resilience? How do we get into that category and that trajectory? Resilience is complicated and complex, and it's from multi-dimensional. It's both a process and an outcome. It is difficult to do, but we can all do it. How do we adapt well? How do we bounce back? For many of us, it's a choice, but it's a choice that is harder and that path is steeper. So if you have a greater number of adverse childhood events and you have a greater number of chronic environmental strains and you have a greater number of challenges on the workforce, this is going to be harder for you, but not impossible. Take that word impossible out of your mind. The good news is we can enhance our own resiliency through learning and training. A very dear psychiatrist friend of mine at Yale, who's now retired and he's professor emeritus, named Stephen Southwick, and his dear friend from New York City, Dennis Charney, published a book. Both of them spent their lives doing quantitative research on trauma and resilience. And this book, while not a bestseller on our New York Times bestseller list, is very helpful and is really written for the lay population, for everybody. And it's scientific ways of bouncing back. I'm only going to go over a few of them, but I'll just briefly note them now. They're things like fostering optimism, facing fear, solidifying one's moral compass, practicing religion and spirituality, attracting and giving social support, imitating resilient role models, asking people how they did it, and observing them and watching them. Physical training, being in good physical shape, mental and emotional training, enhancing one's flexibility. That means no matter what life throws at you, being both cognitively and emotionally flexible, and finding meaning and purpose. I'm only going to talk about two of these today and note them, and they're the first two. So what is optimism and how can we foster that? Optimism is a future-oriented attitude which involves hope and confidence that things will turn out well. Even in our darkest days, we need to be buying into some of that. That our future, maybe not entirely bright, has some bright spots, and that good things will happen with hard work. This is not just Pollyanna, rose-colored glasses. In fact, some of the patients that I work with, they say, oh, you're just trying to tell me to look at the world through a pink lens. And I say, no. Trauma tends to darken our glasses. It makes them dark. What I'm asking you to do is wipe your glasses clean and see more realistically and choose to look at the glass of water as half full rather than half empty. Because if we do, we will feel better. Let me explain this in greater detail and try to apply it to your life. A lot of what that says in the book on mastering resilience is based on what we think of as cognitive behavioral model. And this means that the thoughts that we have impact our feelings and our physiological body and our behaviors. Let me give you an example. Let's say you do poorly on a test. And your thought is, wow, I stink, I'm a loser, this is awful, I'm lazy, crazy, weak, or bad. If you say those things to yourself, what are your feelings going to be? Your feelings are going to be awful. You're going to feel terrible about yourself, you're going to be depressed, you're going to be anxious, you're going to experience shame, maybe some guilt. And what are you going to be feeling physiologically? Well, you're probably going to have butterflies in your stomach, you might feel like you're going to throw up, you might feel a tension in your jaw or clenched fist, you're going to feel awful. And your behavior? Well, maybe the next time you'll decide, why bother to even study? And you might not even study for the test, right? Okay, let's say if the thought is something different, it's a little more optimistic. Let's say you said, that was a hard test, I can study better next time, I'll do better next time. The feeling? Well, you might not be feeling great, you might not be wanting to go to a party, but you're not feeling as awful. And your body is not feeling as awful. And the chances are, if you give yourself those messages, the behaviors are, you're going to study harder the next time. Okay, I hope that makes sense. It works the same for trauma. So if my expertise, a lot of my expertise is in sexual violence. If you are sexually violated and you say to yourself, this is all my fault, I'm a terrible person, I asked for this, I allowed this to happen, you are going to feel horrible. And you are going to wear that in your heart and in your body, and you are going to feel tremendous shame. And your behavior is, you might not go out of the house, you might not apply yourself like you normally would, you might be shut down. If you get assaulted and you tell yourself, this is awful experience, but I am not alone. 1 in 3 women, at least 1 in 3 women have this experience. That lessens the intensity of the depression and the anxiety, and also the internal angst. And your behavior will be not to shut down, but to join other women. I can explain that to you more over time if that doesn't make sense. So how do we foster optimism? We recognize when we're engaging in unhelpful thoughts and we pause. Don't judge yourself. Have compassion for yourself like women have compassion for other people. Don't judge yourself. Sometimes you can dispute those thoughts and challenge them. Or sometimes, I'm almost done. Sometimes you could allow yourself to have those thoughts sit next to you and not take away your power. It's about building a more conscious choice of a style. When something bad happens, how do you foster optimism? You remember that difficulties won't last forever, that where there is pain, good things will happen again. You try to identify your strengths and your resources and notice what is good, the acts of kindness of other men and supportive women who recognize your struggle. How do you foster optimism when something good happens? You give yourself credit for whatever part you played in it, and you express gratitude for the parts that you didn't play. And you try to help foster that feeling and expand it in yourself over time. One big thing again is sometimes when people have experienced trauma, they try to push it away. They don't want to face their fears. And the truth is, we need to face our fears in life. That doesn't mean you need to go into dangerous situations. That means if you're afraid to do something like give a speech, you need to face your fear and walk yourself through it. So fear does not signify weakness. We all experience fear. It's about courage. Feeling courage to tackle those things, to master your fear. Try to figure out what it is you fear. Do you afraid you're gonna look like you don't know anything, or you're stupid, or you're afraid you're gonna fail? What is it under that? Learn to practice skills to face that fear. Develop a plan and a backup plan. Confront the fear in the company of a trusted family member or friend. And sometimes you need to take a calculated leap of faith. One of my favorite quotes, and I don't know that much about William Shakespeare, who's written all these wonderful pieces of literature for us. I don't know that much about him, but what I do know is this quote that I have lived by and that I tell the patients that I work with, which is, beware of the stories you tell yourself, for surely you will be lived by them. So if when you take a test, or when you don't do well in some assignment, or you don't get that good grade, if you tell yourself you're a loser, and that is your explanatory style for life, be careful, because that's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. We need to take our power back by telling ourselves a different story. Here are a number of optimistic things women can say. Hopefully you're going to have my slides and we won't go over them, but you can say, yes, I can. I've done hard things before. I can conquer this again. I am strong. I can reach out if I need help. And as I like to say, again, the Chinese proverb, fall down 7 times, get up 8. So on this day, happy International Women's Day, but not just this day, but every day. Be strong, be independent, be passionate, and be bold. I wish you not only a wonderful Women's Day, but a wonderful every day.
Yeah, thanks a lot for that, Joanne. Chaco here.
Yes.
How are you?
I'm good, how are you?
Yeah, thank you. So, just wanted to, I'll speak in the next minute or so, but I thought since you've given us a lot of all your various experience together, so just want to ask if any of our viewers had any questions from the audience.
Audience, if you have any questions.
I hope it wasn't too controversial. I apologize. Namaste.
Thank you, ma'am. I think you have touched almost all aspects of psychological disorder. And I just wanted to know whether you have treated any patient of mental depression by using hypnotism. You take the patient back to the previous life and treat them. Will you kindly tell just 2-3 things about it?
Yes, so that I actually do not do. I've done some hypnotic inductions, but not taking them back to past lives. That would not be my experience in treating depression. What we usually use a lot here, or a lot of cognitive behavioral techniques, behavioral activation, problem solving, challenging your thinking, getting people more engaged in social support. For trauma-related issues, we tend to do more, which is exactly what our patients, which our people don't want to do, which is trauma processing, which is prolonged exposure, narrative exposure therapy. There is a technique that is shown to be efficacious both in the US and outside called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, which you might think of in some ways as hypnotic because it involves some bilateral stimulation and watching fingers, but I have not actually done that. That would be something I would need to learn.
But it is
I'm
there.
interested in.
Yeah, it is there that patients of psychological disorder can be completely cured by taking them to their previous births, previous lives. And then,
very interesting.
Yeah, and then during, in between 2 births, when the patient is hypnotized, she or he speaks, right? And then the patient describes the life between 2 births, and that is wonderful. And then, and those experiences have also been, tested real life. So I think it's one of the techniques to treat patients of depression and other psychological disorders.
Yes.
Thank you for your talk.
Yes, I'll have to learn more about that. It is not common in the US.
Is it? But I came to know that in the US it is much in vogue. I have read some of the doctors' experiences, and so they got cured. Thank you.
Actually, Dr. Joanne, there's one practitioner who is doing it very well. What I think Professor Sen is talking about, his name is Dr. Brian Wise.
Yes, Many Lives, Many Masters. Many Lives, Many Masters. He has written a book
anyway,
also.
that's okay. And then Only Love Is Real, there's another book that he's written. So, yeah. Anyway, so, yeah, Professor. So, thanks a lot, Professor. So, I think you've been a great replacement for our finance minister. Our finance minister is supposedly one of the most powerful women in India. So she's almost just underneath the prime minister. So she had expressed interest to come and address our audience here. So, and it's great that we got you to fill up